Hello, good morning. So if you haven't heard of ThinkCyber, then we'd like to be the ones who really brought the idea of using nudge theory into the world of security awareness. And now everyone's talking about it, which is great. And I'm kind of following on quite well from what Sarah spoke on earlier in what we'd perhaps like to talk about as people-centric security. I don't know why, but I find the word human almost a bit dehumanizing. Like, we don't really relate to ourselves as being humans, do we? We're people. So this idea of people-centric security, and it's trying to move away perhaps from this idea of tricking with phishing sims and boring the pants off people with security e-learning, and trying to do something a little bit more fueled by an understanding of behavioural science. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so let's get into this. So why do we bother? I'm not going completely existential this morning. I'm going to focus in on why do we bother with security awareness training? Well, obviously, we need to build some level of foundational knowledge, and I think we've done quite well at that. Generally, people understand what phishing is. They understand some of the basics here. So we're trying to build this knowledge, these skills and understanding, but we've got to admit that we're also slightly doing this to tick a compliance box. And where this can sometimes go wrong is if we think that actually that's all we need to do here. Because fundamentally, what we really want to be doing is reducing operational risk. That's what the rest of the security team is doing. That's why you're buying all these technical tools. You're actually trying to reduce operational risk. And if you're going to do that, you've got to change people's behaviours. You don't just need knowledge. Knowledge needs to turn into action. And so if you're looking at behavioural change, you also want to understand what's the impact. And you need to start to measure that you're having that impact. And again, picking apart why you want to measure, well, there's lots of different things. You want to understand if what you're doing is actually working. You want to know the reach you're getting. That's part of it. It's not the whole answer. You want to understand if people are actually engaging with the content you're pushing out there. Engagement is fundamental, but again, it's not the whole answer. What you really want to know is, are people changing their behaviours? Are you reducing risk for your organisation? And then obviously we have our own sort of individual needs. Am I doing my job well? Can I prove to my boss I'm doing my job well? Can I keep my budget, please? Please, thank you. And this turns to thinking about what we're measuring and whether we are actually measuring the right thing. And there's two sort of things we can measure. And we tend to get stuck measuring this idea of performance. We're measuring whether the thing we're doing is kind of doing its thing, i.e., how many people have seen my security awareness training. What we're not always measuring is, did that security awareness training have any impact? Did it have an effect? So we want to have these measures of effect. The problem is this is much harder, so we get a bit lazy and we just measure this bit here. So what I want to talk about is how we can actually prove change and prove we're actually having an impact through our security awareness, because this really is what you should be trying to do. So what if you could get some stats a bit like this? So we're seeing phishing sim link clicks come down and security reporting increase. Well, you might see some of that from your traditional stuff, but what about all these other behaviours? What about actual clicks on links in emails from any unknown sender? So not just a simulation, but any email. Or credentials having clicked a link go down. Or people forgetting to lock their screen being reduced. Or perhaps people uploading files to different browsers. As the last talk talked about, these are all mistakes we make or things we're about to do. But these are measures that we could look at and go, well, can we change that? Can we actually reduce our operational risk? So how do we actually think about doing that? The problem we've got is that our traditional approaches to awareness don't really rely on an understanding of how behaviour really works and how we actually tend to act. The idea in traditional approach is that if I give people knowledge and skills, that's going to impact their decisions and how they're going to act in the moment, and that's going to lead to behaviour. It simply doesn't actually work like that. So there's lots of examples of why. There's some really interesting research by Carlson, who looked at why do people follow or not follow policies, and they saw a good compliance, but then it broke down when there was a clash with the context in the organisation, i.e. it was an organisation that really valued delivery. And so you're sending this mixed message to your staff, I want you to be secure, but I also want you to deliver, and they do what's going to get them their bonus and get their performance reviews. But also, we're forgetting about how we really make decisions. Quite a lot of the time, we're slightly on autopilot, and we make quick decisions. Our brain is trying to process a lot of information, and we jump to the easier decision to make, not the real decision we're trying to make. And I'll come on to that in a second. But also, when we're acting by habit, that basically bypasses the bit of the brain that's going to dip into your knowledge base. You're really just processing your emails and clicking through them. You're not really turning to your knowledge, your skills and understanding. And so traditional learning isn't really going to impact this. So let's dig a bit deeper into that. We used to like to think that we're all really rational people, so we try and maximize our gains and we minimize our losses. But the work by people like Kahneman and Tversky really underpinned this idea that we don't always think like that. Actually, in reality, we're making quick decisions, and that's because the brain is trying to process so much information. It has these rules of thumb and these heuristics. Our brain is a little bit lazy, you could say. It sometimes makes an easier decision than the one that that you're meant to be making, and then it rationalizes it after the fact. Like, do I want to buy this product, or do I like the celebrity who's selling that product? And you make the wrong decision, you make the easy decision, which is, yeah, I like the celebrity, I must like the product too. So there's lots of examples where this behavioural science comes into play in the day-to-day. So priming can be an example. So when you see something, it's what Derren Brown uses to make you say the right word after a whole day. He's been priming you all the way through by letting you see this information over and over again. Authority. Obviously, we do what figures in authority. It's why you get men in white coats selling toothpaste, and it's why you use celebrities in marketing. Social proof. What are other people doing? Well, I want to do what they're doing. Scarcity, you see this all the time on websites. There's only one left, you must buy it. But also loss aversion. We really value something that we feel we already own, and we don't want to give it up. We all think bad things won't happen to us. And emotion and effect can be really impactful as well on whether we behave in a certain way. And then also, information that we've seen, maybe we've seen something in the news, then we're more likely to respond to that. The bad guys, you'll recognize all of these from things in phishing emails, won't you? The bad guys use these all the time, but why can't we use them? Why can't we use them for good? And so what you're really getting into here is how you actually change people's behaviors. And there's two models that I really love that I'll share with you. BJ Fogg, really good book called Tiny Habits. He talks about for any behavior to happen, there's got to be an element of motivation. Do I actually want to do this behavior? Then there's got to be an element of ability. Can I do it? Do I know how? But really importantly, there's got to be some sort of trigger, some sort of prompt that makes you actually decide to act. And then you've got the nudge unit, or the behavioural science team, used to be part of government and sort of span out of the cabinet office. They had this EAST model. So an effective nudge is going to have an element of ease. Is this an easy thing for people to do? It's going to have an element of attractiveness. Do I want to do it? And so you can see that these relate to motivation and ability quite clearly. They pull out of motivation this social proof thing. Are other people doing it? And finally, they also talk about this idea of timeliness. So some really strong clues here that context and timeliness are fundamental. And so this is how behaviour really works. It takes place in a context. And for most of us, that's going to be on our IT. There's some sort of trigger that leads to an action. We're acting in the wrong place with e-learning. It doesn't matter how good it is. If you do great videos, then people will complain less. Great, well done. You might get higher engagement. Is it going to change the behaviour over here 6 months later, perhaps, when you're at the desk, or you're busy, or the context makes this tricky? And then, of course, there's also tools that are acting over here. There are some tools looking at events in the scene, for example, and they use that to tune who you train, or even phishing simulations. All you can really do here is follow up after the fact, and that really gets on people's nerves. You're essentially giving them a slap wrist and telling them off. But also, there's evidence that suggests people don't really learn well at the point of failure. Essentially, our brains are going, la, 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 this isn't happening to me. We're trying to protect our ego. And if you interview people who've fallen for phishing sims, they quite often can't even really remember it, and you have to prove, no, you did click. And look, you've even saved your credentials in my fake website. So what do we want to do? We want to get in the context. So the simplest thing that we could do there, and that we do with red flags, is just priming people in and around their use of their IT. So content that's appearing actually on their desktop. It's there, it's hanging around. But in some of the research we did with Cardiff University, we did this as people opened their inbox. So just a little reminder that phishing was a thing, and it had a significant impact in whether people actually spotted phishing in their inbox, because their brain was primed, it was just a bit more front of mind. But where this gets much more interesting is trying to intervene at this point, when someone's actually about to do some sort of risky behaviour, in that point of risk. So they're about to upload a file, they're about to click a link, they're about to enter their credentials. And obviously, if you can do this silently as well, measure a baseline, and that's where you can start to see some of these impactful changes. So let's really go into what it looks like to do some of this. what does it really look like? So what we'd do is we'd start with priming people. So we call these stories in red flags, and they come straight onto your desktop. And they're there for your staff to engage with as and when they choose. And this is quite an interesting model, because we put them in the background, and it's quite passive. And people think, well, that's not going to work. But actually, we get 80 to 90% engagement. I think because it's just there, hanging around, and maybe at some point in the day, your staff like to procrastinate. I don't know, I couldn't possibly mention, but it's there, it looks interesting, and people do read it. So this is introducing the concept. It's starting to prime them to the idea of what we're going to start to teach them about. And also, it only takes 45 seconds. So this will appear like this, just hanging around on the background, in the desktop in the background. But then we want to kind of go a little bit further. So perhaps as they open their Outlook, obviously this has been magnified a little bit, but as they open their Outlook, maybe a little reminder nudge. So this is now in the context where the threat lies. It's not really stopping them, maybe takes 5 seconds to read, but we're also warning them that we're about to start nudging them, and we're using this same repeatable phrase throughout the whole campaign, check the sender, and trying to drill in that concept. But then this is where it gets really fun. So I'm not sure anyone in the room would actually click this link. However, if you did choose to hover over it, then maybe a little nudge saying, actually, are you sure you know this sender? And a nice big red arrow drawing your eye to where you need to look. And this kind of works on 2 levels. It reinforces the good behavior, which actually some people might be doing anyway. Doesn't really get in the way, but it can also stop you. It can also kind of create that pause and knock you out of that system 1 autopilot to that more deliberative system 2 way of thinking. Go, hold on, actually, no, you're right, I don't really know this person. So we've ticked off some of these things. We've seen this have a significant impact. This is actually a very short sort of period this ran over when a phishing test was done at the same time. We saw much more reporting. But then also we've seen this level of real link clicks in any email from an unknown sender come down by significant amounts. But what about some of these other behaviors? Well, if I was particularly stubborn and decided to click a link and then actually decide to enter my credentials, well, we could pick this up as well. So now we're in the browser and we're seeing, well, look, you just clicked a link from someone you don't know, and now you're entering credentials in a website that you haven't been to before. Maybe, again, this is a time to stop and think. It's very, very subtle. It's not really getting in the way. You could take over the whole screen at this point, but really this is about embedding good behaviors. It's not meant to be a control that stops you all the time. It's trying to teach you to think and realize that these are the points of risk you should be worrying about. So we've ticked off another one. I like this one. It's slightly passive-aggressive when you get back to your computer. Whoops, it looks like you maybe forgot to lock your screen. You can also do this in a nice positive nudge. So well done, you did lock your screen. Good on you. And then finally, we talked earlier, I think the last speaker was talking about uploads to WeTransfer and things like that. Just that little nudge at the point you're actually about to do it. This is quite a generic nudge. You'd normally change this to something like, at this organization, we want you to use OneDrive, and this is how to use it. And so you're really steering people and giving them the information they actually need at the point of risk. I know some people are coming up with AIs everywhere, isn't it? Little chatbots you can ask about security policy. So you're about to upload, oh, should I upload to WeTransfer? Who's going to type that in? No one's going to type into that. They're already halfway through the process, whereas this is giving that, maybe I shouldn't do this, and obviously someone's probably tracking the fact that I am about to do this. Not that this is meant to be a stick, but it's helping them to think, what should I do at this point of risk? And obviously it's very important to us that we get this right. This people-centric security is about an approach that's in line with the way we actually think and we behave. And so we obviously run surveys of people who are using red flags and get these fantastic results. It's about 400 users at Welsh Water, in fact. This is a great stat as well. It comes from Doc Martens, whose tagline is rebellious self-expression. So that's why that many people did the mandatory security awareness training, because I rebelliously self-express, not to be trained. But if you drip feed, if you drop this content straight on the desktop, we've kept this statistic at 90% month on month for the last 3 years it's now coming up to. And that consistent behavior, because the content keeps changing, is very much branded to look and feel in their tone of voice. This is just a quick very aside to the generations of security awareness, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but first we thought we could bore people, then we thought we'd trick them. We really risk, if we get nudge theory wrong, falling into this idea where we nag people, we tell them off after the fact. So what we really need to do is find ways to be right in the context, steer and guide. This is not about more reprimanding and more slaps on the wrist. So some final observations, really, just to pull that together. Our traditional approaches, they can set a foundation, but they rely on this flawed idea that you just teach people and then that leads to behaviours. And we all know that that isn't really working. We've seen the stat is still at the 80 and 90% of people, of attacks are caused with some sort of human error. So it's ignoring context. It's ignoring the fact that we aren't actually the rational beings we'd like to think we are. We take shortcuts, but it's also ignoring habit, which is an entire different talk, which I could do another time. What the behavioural science really tells us, this timeliness and context are fundamental to the way that we can actually change people's behaviour. And so we need to think about how we can start to do that and steer people in the moment and not tell them off after the fact. Thank you very much. I was also quite optimistic about time for questions, but we have a stand out there. If you'd like to come and talk to us about red flags and how it implements these theories, then please do. Thank you.